Hello and welcome back to Parley. This prompt was written by FreeWilliam. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about the companion stuff in Warframe. Companions are sort of immortal now and got a bunch of new build options, and this is about that. FreeWilliam says, I hear I can now use any pet I want without them being dead most of the time. I'm currently leaning toward Maximum Puppies, a hound with diversified denial and duplex bond, for the sheer joy of it. Can you tempt me with any other suddenly interesting sidekick configurations, even? I think I sure can. So, this parlay is going to be kind of like a listen along if you want to play Warframe and sort of think about what you want to do with this new stuff. I do have a stream archive and actually a few videos coming or already out. I'll link to what's out at the time of this parlay going up in the description. So if you want literally just a bunch of videos from me about that, I did cover the subject that way. It's rare for a parlay to be about something I have made a video about exactly. But this is a little bit different than that topic. And I do think I have something to say that is a bit distinct from what's in those pieces of content. So that's what I'm going to do here. It's going to be kind of a supplement that tries to be its own thing. If this is all you listen to, it gives you a way to get started. And I'm just going to talk about these changes being made to companions generally as well. I think that where this is going is really interesting. I don't think this is kind of the end, but only the beginning of companions getting a new breath of life. So a couple different sections here. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the changes are, just because I think it can be helpful to think about them that way. A couple of examples. You wanted specific examples, it sounds like, so I will talk about them. I'll talk about the one you suggested too, diversified denial and duplex bond. They won't interact, of course. Duplex bond doesn't let the companion use abilities like diversified denial, but you'll get the diversified denial clones and then duplex bond clones when diversified denial isn't happening. Do note that when I tried diversified denial and duplex bond, it looks like the companion doesn't use duplex bond while diversified denial is active, so you'll get a lot of copies a very large majority of the time, but you will not actually get more copies most of the time, as far as I could tell. I suspect that if you make copies with duplex bond and then diversified denial triggers, the duplex bond copies stay. But if your companion rolls in and uses diversified denial at the beginning of a fight, it will not make duplex bond copies until that ends, until diversified denial ends, as far as I could tell. And something I'll come back to in this update is that a lot of the bond mods do really interesting things, but don't seem to work perfectly yet. And so this is an update where I would caution you a little. It seems like they're making more changes to companions, so that this isn't even all of the balance changes or mod reworks that are going to happen, and also that not all of the changes made work yet. So just because that interaction doesn't currently work doesn't necessarily mean that it will continue not to work, though I think it's unclear with that example that you gave. But a very fun idea. Having a ton of companions, having a sort of minion master thing, is pretty cool. And again, there are at least several effects among companions that do that, and also a few more benefits for doing that. Things that make it a bit better to have a bunch of mini companions that are just attacking. That was very fun previously. I love diversified denial, but didn't provide too many benefits besides multiple targets for enemies to shoot. That's good. But now I think it has real offensive merits as well. Like, it is legitimately very strong to do that. So I will talk about that as well. I know, FreeWilliam, about you as a player, that you don't entirely care about that. It's not of utmost importance to you that it be good necessarily. But I think it's no bad thing if it's very good and very fun. So provided that it is something you think is fun, yeah, I think it's pretty good. I have something for a companion, like beast on the ground, 4 on the floor, companion damage. So that'll be in here. But I do want to talk a little bit about what the changes were, because I think thinking about some of them in certain ways is helpful. So the main things in this wave were companions not ever dying permanently. The changes that make mods make sense because that is now the case, and bond mods. So we'll talk about the not dying thing first. Now, I hate to be persnickety, especially because this doesn't even exist in real life anymore, but companions built with the mods we had available frequently didn't ever die in normal missions. I think this wasn't a problem that was in the game necessarily, as much as something that people didn't like, and so it's good that they took it out. But I would like to say that I actually think to some extent this isn't always better. Like for shorter missions, your companion wasn't going to be dead permanently, and so this system means your companion has a little downtime where before they wouldn't have had downtime. Mostly I'm talking about Sentinels. Regen and primed regen, which are the mods for Sentinels in Warframe that make your Sentinel come back to life when it dies, well, it doesn't ever not come back to life when it dies now, so they changed it so that it comes back to life much faster than before. Beast companions, or just not Sentinels, robots 4 on the floor companions, I called them, but then that leaves out MOAs. Anyway, you get it, not Sentinels, still go down. They lose all their health and they go down like a player. It's just that at the end of that bleed out timer, they get back up instead of dying permanently. That bleed out timer is 60 seconds. The companion downtime timer by default is 60 seconds now. So Sentinels get a short one, but there's nothing you can do to make it immediate. There are mods you can equip that make the bleed out timer, the cooldown for the Sentinel to come back much shorter, and I would recommend using those mods, certainly. There's one that gives you an 18-second reduction if you kill an Eximus enemy, meaning that if your Sentinel with primed regen dies and then you kill an Eximus enemy, you get it back basically instantly. So that's cool. But other companions will be down for 60 seconds if you don't revive them, and you don't use any mods to help them come back to life. Unless you revive them, or use mods that help them come back to life. Still, I would like to suggest that to some extent, Sentinels have become even more of the kind of hands-off option, and you have more to gain if you play into other companions that go down and you have longer to wait before they naturally get back up. If you enable mods, fulfill the conditions of mods that give them a reduction to their bleed out timer so they come back faster, that benefits you arguably more with the beast companions, or the, you know what I mean. I'm just going to say beast companions from now on, but I mean the robots too, just not Sentinels. You have more to gain if you play into those mods because they will be down for longer if you don't do anything, but also you could just revive them, whereas Sentinels, you can't just revive them. So something to consider. But I personally think that this update benefits the beasts much more than it benefits Sentinels. Primed regen giving your Sentinel like 3 or 4 extra lives and a big chunk of invulnerability when it came back previously meant that, at least in my experience, I would basically never played missions where my Sentinel, just with prime regen and some basic survivability mods, ever permanently died. That just really wasn't actually a problem in the game, in my opinion. The problem here is that players were having that issue, not that there was actually no way to prevent that from happening. There were plenty of ways to prevent that from happening, but players didn't like them, know about them, use them, whatever it was. And so I think it's great that you don't have to worry about that now. But I do think it's worth noting that Sentinels didn't often actually gain survivability compared to how they were previously in this update. It's really more beast companions that will run off on their own, get downed, and then you won't be able to go save them before they bleed out. That is now just completely not a problem anymore. And that's the majority of companions. I mean, most companions were like that. They would just run off to the middle of nowhere, die. You had no control of any part of this process, and then if you didn't revive them that one time, they were gone, unless you used one of the few things the game offered to revive them. So this is a big change, but I would argue it's a bigger change for the beast category, because it brings them from being like a one-time and then you lose them and then that sucks situation to being permanent even if you do nothing, and then you can make them have even higher uptime if you play into it more, which I do want to say I think is a really cool design. It means that you get to have the experience of using one and not worrying about if it stays alive, and you get to play into them if you want to. If you want to do the kind of Beastmaster thing, you have things to gain from doing that. I will say in this section that I didn't actually check every single thing in Warframe that was built around companions permanently dying, but has now presumably changed. So some things that come to mind that I actually don't know what they changed these things to yet are Oberon's passive, kind of just buff the stats of Beast companions, so maybe that's fine now. But I think it did something about keeping them alive. I don't know. They had a bleed out mod that I think I read, but I don't remember what that does because there's like a million mods in this update. We'll get to the bond part in a sec. There's the a lot of the survivability mods have changed generally in Warframe. So separately in this update, the base health and shields mods, redirection, vitality, steel fiber, etc. for Warframes changed, and I don't know if they changed the companion ones the same way. Just so they do what they say they do, they multiply your total, health, as the case may be, rather than your base health. So it's much more clear what you're going to get out of them. They're not really stronger or weaker. I will say that I tried equipping some defensive mods on my companions, which I'm not sure I would recommend doing now, because they'll just come back to life if they die. But I tried, and it seemed like they were giving more than they used to. That might be wrong, but I got like a weird amount of shields. We'll come back to that later. So maybe something to look into. I don't think I have too much else to say, just to say that, some of the abilities that revived companions from death recently, which they did add prior to this update, but don't seem to have caught on or sufficiently encouraged players to use companions. I don't know what those effects changed to now. Protea's Repair Dispensary and there's a Parazon mod are the two that come to mind, but I think there is at least one more that I'm just not remembering. I would be interested to know what those are. I suspect that they just reduce the time until your companion comes back now, which, like, that makes sense and everything. And I don't think that's bad necessarily. Again, being able to have like a sentinel with prime regen, it dies, you wait 25 seconds, but you have this ability that means it just comes back 20 seconds sooner. So it's up basically all of the time and nothing can ever stop that from being the case. It seems very good if you build into one of the combos I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So I think that's really cool. Basically, my summary is you could maybe think of it as companions never die now. The bigger gain, I think, is had by non-sentinels, which already mostly wouldn't have been dead at the end of a mission and have very low uptime, very low downtime anyway. But beasts will now not go run off and get themselves killed. Well, they will, but they'll just come back to life. And you can play into that mechanic where you can build them back faster if you get kills or whatever with a bond mod you have on them, and possibly increase their uptime. You could think of it that way. You've got a Smedikavat and you like Charm because it gives you more loot. Well, if you equip the mods that make it come back faster after it dies, it's probably gonna die at some point in the mission, and then that means you can play into that to get more Charm triggers because you'll revive it faster. It will use Charm again quicker. Okay, the bond mods, pretty simple, and I'm mostly just going to talk about a few examples, so I'll just summarize. There's not a whole lot tying these together. There are a whole bunch of different mods that the kind of theme is you and your companion working together, and you can equip them simultaneously, so you can equip a whole bunch on one companion if you want. The key takeaway for this, for me, is that a lot of the time in Warframe's history, the game has added a new type of thing, but they only add like one or two of that thing at a time. And this means that when it's first added, that's the only game in town. They add a way to revive sentinels from death, but there's only one way to do that at first. Maybe they add more over time, but there's only one way at first. So either there's no opportunity cost, because there's no need to equip anything else in that slot or whatever, or there's no other way to do the thing, so you kind of have to equip that mod. Either way, it's kind of not a choice. It sort of starts a new build option in Warframe in a way that makes it the least interesting. It's kind of redundant and might as well not be a decision, but in the future, maybe they'll make more of these and then it will be a meaningful decision. In this case, they did the opposite. We got a ton, 14, I think, new bond mods all at once, which means the opportunity cost of equipping these bond mods is deceptively high. There's a ton of them that are really good, that are competing for those spaces, so there's lots of decisions to make. I will talk a little bit later about some general guidance, just my thoughts, on how you might approach a roster of companions to make them different, unique, fun, interesting to use, generalist, specific, whatever you like. Because there are so many good bond mods and different ways to use them already, and this isn't even all of the changes, remember, that I think for some people it's going to be a little bit difficult to figure out exactly where to put everything. You know what I mean? You want to use all this stuff, but where do you put it all? I want to use all of these effects, but where for some of them, you know? And part of my advice would be that you will probably have difficulty not destroying a companion's utility if you try to equip all of the bond mods that are good. They did a good job in the sense from a build system perspective with this update in that they made it a decision from the start. You kind of can't easily just put everything new on from the very beginning, or you might think you can, but I think there are compelling reasons to, you know, decide what goes in each mod slot. There's a lot of competition, in my opinion. So let's talk through that now. I'm not going to talk through everything. Again, I have the stream on that. If that's something you want, I do have a stream where I just talk through everything. But it sounds to me like what FreeWilliam you are more interested in is hearing more about some specific recommendations. And then again, I'm going to try to give some vague thoughts about, you know, how to build niches in your roster of companions. I think it'll make more sense when I get into it. But so let's do a few examples. Let's start with the diversified denial duplex bond thing. The concept of lots of doggies or cats in a group mauling your enemy to death. So the first combo I want to discuss is the duplex vicious tenacious bond combo. This requires a melee attack companion, though note that the Helios companion's deconstructor is a melee weapon, even though it's ranged. So you can do that on the Helios, but mostly, you know, cats and dogs. Duplex bond is you spend energy and make copies of your companion. They can't cast abilities, and here abilities includes using bond mods. So they just attack without bond mod effects. They get the base damage and crit, I would assume, but besides that, you know, they don't. You can probably buff their damage too, like with external buffs like Roar or Eclipse or whatever. I would expect that works on those too. So Duplex Bond lets you copy your companion's basic damage output a lot of times. There are a few question marks for me that I think would make a big difference if they were true. For example, Mecha Overdrive for Kubros allows you to give your Kubro a lot of status chance. And then if they're doing mostly slash damage, and that's copied to the duplex bond copies, well, I would expect them to be able to kill high-level enemies all by themselves, individually, with no further help, even from this combo that I'm going to talk about. But I don't know if that specifically works, so that's something to think about. What I'm going to suggest instead is something that will be good damage on pretty much any companion, so you can get lots of whatever you like, and it will still be useful. So Vicious Bond, this allows the companion to basically it will strip armor from enemies when it attacks them. It shatters away 8 of the armor, 15%, which is like an eighth of the armor, every time it attacks an enemy. Now this won't work on the copies from Duplex Bond or Diversified Denial, for example, but the copies will benefit from the enemy having reduced armor. You're basically creating like a squad leader among the companions that is able to lower enemy defenses, and then the other companions can take advantage of that. So while you aren't increasing the amount of armor reduction in the group, the armor reduction is more beneficial because there are more units that benefit highly from reduced armor running around, and you don't have to babysit them by reducing the armor yourself. One of the companions can do it on their own. I found this to be reasonably effective. I kind of sicked a group of them on some, you know, hundreds level armored enemies, like in the 100s level armored enemies, and I was pretty pleased with the amount of damage they did, especially with Tenacious Bond as an addition. This allows you to, what does this one do? Oh my goodness, there's so many of these. I'm sorry, the names. Normally I'm very good with names for these things, but it's extremely difficult to keep all of them there, and they're all named Bond as well. Tenacious Bond says, headshot kills reduce companion recovery time by 3 seconds. If the companion's critical chance is over 50%, then you gain 1.2x final damage multiplier, crit damage multiplier. This one is just to get your companion back faster. I just recommended it because you will likely have high crit chance. The companion's crit chance needs to be over 50% if you're doing this combination. You can run Maul and Bite in particular, and a lot of companions will be over 50% with that. Kavats specifically, and then some other companions have high enough base crit chance to go over that. Now, Hounds specifically, Hounds are weird because they have their own separate weapons. That are robotic weapons, but they're not the other robotic weapons. They're like melee modules, which is sort of weird. So if you want to do the Tenacious Spawn thing, it's just to get some bonus crit damage yourself. But the idea is that you'd probably want to run the crit rate mod on your companion in this situation because the companion is doing significant damage. So that's a little module that you can add. I think that's exciting because a lot of companions didn't really have a path to doing good damage. It was sort of like Sentinels. There were ways to output a good amount of status. The Vergless, you can equip a Galaxian on your Sentinel. That will kill higher level enemies. And Kubros with Mecha Overdrive could get enough status to do Slash. Those could kill higher level enemies. So having your companion fight with you, it's not really a matter of viability, just if they don't have a way to get through armor at all, they can't really do anything offensively. It's not really a matter of whether it's enough damage or not, it's no damage or some damage. And previously, I think, basically only Kubros and Sentinels had like a path to doing essentially any damage to enemies at higher levels. But now, basically every companion has a path, anyway, to dealing respectable damage at higher levels. Kavats even have Swipe, which lets them hit multiple targets, which does work with Vicious Bond removing armor, as far as I could tell, and will even give you multiple shockwaves with Seismic, I believe Seismic Bond. If you equip it, it looked like that worked to me. So that allows you to build a Kavat with like 5, 6, 7 meaningfully different offensive boosts on them. Not all that different than building a weapon for your Warframe. And then they have a little room for, Fetch and Animal Instinct if you want to bring those, which I do. But you can see, talking through that, there's lots of good mods to equip, but that's the whole build. I mean, you have like maybe room for one of the Kavat's precepts, maybe. So it's exciting because there is really a reason to make a choice there. Were you to take an Adarza Kavat, for example, that's the one that increases your crit rate by a flat amount. Well, it feels like a nice pair with Tenacious Bond. You get crit damage alongside the crit rate, right? But building Tenacious Bond and Cat's Eye, which is the Adarza crit thing, and Tech Enhance, which increases the uptime of Cat's Eye, its ability duration for Kavats, and Fetch, which is the vacuum mod for Kavats and Beasts, Animal Instinct, which I want because it turns your minimap into something more useful. We do get enemy radar by default now, but loot radar we don't, and I think further enemy radar is useful, so I'm still going to take Animal Instinct. And then, well, I recommended also taking Bite, Maul, Duplex Bond, Tenacious Bond, Vicious Bond, and Swipe, which is like 12, 13 mods. A lot. And do note that in there are 0 survivability mods for your Kavat. Maybe you don't need them, because it can come back to life if it dies, but it probably makes sense to bring something that keeps the Kavat alive, or more mods that let you reduce its recovery time, but Tenacious Bond is the only one in that build I just said. So, yeah, like, it's demanding, you see what I mean. Having a companion that has a good ability, but only one good ability, or like the power of the companion, is concentrated in very few precepts or just mods, is very valuable now, because there are tons of mods to equip in that space. Two good abilities, but 2 mods, instead of one a little bit better ability, but you don't have 2 good abilities, is now kind of better in a lot of cases, because you don't have any lack of good things to equip ever on any companion. And so having less mods that are good, but they're a little bit better in exchange, is really good. You won't need stuff to equip. Of course, that does imply that you have a lot of these mods. which it could take a little while to get. But a lot of established players probably have the reputation for open world vendors. The kind of beast tamer open world vendors are the people that sell these. And I suspect FreeWilliam, for example, you likely have reputation for those factions. So you can probably buy quite a few of these right away. Might not be true for everyone, but then maybe they wouldn't have other companion mods too, so go figure. Okay, so kind of a damage module for some companions. I also wanted to talk about Manifold and Mystic Bond. Manifold Bond is a robot only. You can't use it on beasts. And this time I actually mean beasts. Sorry for the confusion. It can't be on Kuber's Kavats, but it can be on, I think, Hounds and Moas and Sentinels. And it means that if you kill enemies with 3 status effects, you reduce your companion's ability cooldowns. And then your companion, doing its abilities, can trigger Mystic Bond, which is when your companion does an ability 5 times, you get to cast an ability for free. 5 times? Well, it sounds not that great if the companion uses their normal timer for abilities. The companion has a 10-second cooldown ability, let's say, and they have to use it 5 times, and then every 50 seconds you get a free ability. It doesn't do that much necessarily, but it could get a lot more exciting if you built a weapon that guaranteed that kills would be with 3 status effects, which is surprisingly easy to do, at least in my opinion. You can use an ability like Saren's Toxic Lash or Zaku's Helminth ability that gives you Void as a separate chunk of damage. So that's 1 guaranteed status effect every single time you attack, let alone kill anything. You could have a weapon that forces a status effect. So this could be like a lot of heavy attack melee weapons will force Slash, for example. A good number of shotguns and elemental based weapons do guarantee a status effect when you fire them, like aside from their normal damage output. And then all you need to do is inflict 1 status effect and kill an enemy, and then you will reduce your Sentinel's ability cooldown every single time you kill an enemy. And you can imagine how if you did that in Warframe, a horde shooter, you could have your Sentinel's ability go off, kind of see whatever it does happening, and then just shoot a crowd of enemies, kill 3 or 4 of them, your Sentinel's ability will go off immediately again, and then every 5 times you shoot anything, you'll get a free ability. That could generate substantial energy. You could imagine that giving you quite a bit of energy back. Imagine the companion is Death Cube, which already gives you more energy orbs as it kills things or gets assists. Pretty good stuff. And Duplex Bond means that the copies getting kills or assists, I think a lot of them allow an assist. Your companion just damages enemies. That will give you more energy as well. So you can create a companion that is an offensive partner, which is also a powerful energy battery if you want to, mostly robots. Because I think Manifold Bond is a big enabler for Mystic Bond, which is otherwise not that great. Getting one free ability every 50 seconds, and then this is just my taste, I guess, but I feel like it would be quite difficult to time it so you actually used the free ability every 50 seconds on something that was actually expensive, you know what I mean? Whereas if it's happening all the time, it becomes close to just every ability you cast will not cost energy, or most abilities. Even so, I could see this being more fun if you spammed it on like a Warframe build that wanted to spam an expensive ability. You're just like nuking groups of enemies. The new Dagath, for example, you could use her like horse charge 4th ability and have that cost a chunk of energy every time, and then like half of the times you use it, you'll end up getting all the energy back. Cool stuff. So yeah, those are just some examples, just a few quick examples of things I didn't talk about too much in the stream or other places as well. So hopefully there's not too much overlap for people that do watch everything. Of things that you can do with companions that will be very powerful, very fun, hopefully. I think it's been pretty fun so far. And that's only scratching the surface. I mean, there were a lot of mods, as we discussed them, of the Bond mods that were quite niche. They're very good, but they're just only good. They're only applicable a certain amount of the time. So for example, Restorative Bond makes you get more health back from health orbs by a lot, like 60. You get like twice as much health back from health orbs. So Necros is over the moon. I mean, that's crazy, but it just doesn't do much if you're not generating significant amounts of health orbs. so very good when it's going to be good, but it does kind of invite you to make a specific build that is going to be paired with those Warframes. I was actually rather pleased, personally, to see that they put in so many new mods that were all so good, like reasonably well balanced out of the gate, that it means that there are many new generalist mods and many new very specific mods. So there's room for you to enjoy this no matter which you want or if you want both. You want to build a bunch of companions as dedicated partners for specific builds. There are quite a few mods where it makes sense to do that, and they don't make that much sense if you equip them all the time. You don't want to deal with that, and you just want a companion you can set and forget. About half of the mods cater to that as well. I'm not entirely sure if that was on purpose or not, but I think it's great. I'll tell you, it's pretty evenly split down the middle, in my opinion, so yeah, I think that was purposeful. And now I will talk a little bit about what I envision myself actually doing when I, make companion builds going forward. So yeah, obviously it's going to be both. I'm interested in some generalists and some more niche options. This update means that I'm a little bit more interested in making specific companions. So for example, previously I might have equipped Death Cube when I wanted Death Cube's precept that means it will give you energy orbs after it gets a certain amount of assists. So I might bring Death Cube because I want more energy on the loadout. Well, Duplex Bond existing means that that's stronger on Death Cube. Death Cube is more, like even more of a specialist in that way. Other companions can do that thing. They can also give me energy with Duplex Bond. But if I'm going to want energy for my loadout, me as a player, I'm more inclined to just pick Death Cube loaded with all of the energy stuff. I'm going to do, Death Cube's energy generating precept, Duplex Bond, the Manifold Bond and Mystic Bond combo with Vaporize on Death Cube. That's already like half of the mod slots. And I'm going to focus more on that. That's me anyway. Then it will be things like the Nautilus, which groups enemies together. That feels very generalist to me. So I'm going to run the 4 most generalism mods that ever did generalist, which I guess would be Momentous, Manifold, Duplex, and Contagious. Contagious Bond is like sort of like a mini mecha set, status effects spread when things die, for everyone, everything. Which I want on mecha set companions. Spread status while you spread status, but I kind of think is good a lot of the time too. So you could see how what would have been, Death Cube was a little more specific before. Maybe I wanted this companion when I wanted a bit more energy, but it didn't do anything too drastic to do that. I'm interested not only in how Death Cube and every companion is now kind of a little better at that, so Death Cube alone is a more meaningful solution to your energy economy. I'm also interested in making that an even more extreme effect by taking the opportunity to run anything that is like an energy generating combo and making Death Cube kind of all about that. To me, this makes this more fun because it makes it more likely that I can actually use these things as tools. Death Cube is now kitted out that when I want energy, it provides a kind of complete experience where I can get the energy very safely. Because you need to kill enemies with a lot of status effects for the Manifold Mystic combo, I think I would want to equip that Death Cube with a weapon that was very many different status effect focused, maybe at the cost of some damage. If that was something I wanted to do, maybe I'll even build a companion weapon specifically for that thing. They may buff companion weapons as well. Robotic sentinel weapons currently haven't been changed at all, so a lot of them are kind of weak still, though the fact that you can have many copies of your companion has kind of made that more reasonable. And because so many of these mods trigger when your companion gets an assist just by touching an enemy, it's also a little bit better to have a weapon that merely hits enemies, even if it doesn't do much damage. That was okay before, but just didn't offer that much of a benefit. And the damage from the Vergless was so much higher than everything else that it just didn't make that much sense. Whereas now the benefits of just hitting enemies with your Sentinel are so much more meaningful that I would be willing to abandon significant companion damage just to get those benefits more consistently. You could imagine a companion weapon that was able to consistently hit 3 status effects, and therefore if you kill anything your Sentinel shot anyway, your Warframe build doesn't have to have prepared at all, and you will kill an enemy with 3 status effects. For Manifold Bonds reduction, which means you do more Sentinel abilities, which means that Mystic Bond triggers, which means you get more energy for free. That whole thing. So that interests me a lot, making things that in practice are pretty set and forget, but the build for the Death Cube, for example, is quite specified. You know, it's something very, very specifically trying to fill a role. Likewise, there are examples like with the Smedikavat, which I often pair with Necros. Smedikavat buff can give you more loot, and Necros can make you more loot, or some other Warframes, of course. And so I often bring a Smedikavat with Necros. If I want to dedicate this run to making more loot, I prefer to kind of go all in rather than doing it all the time. I just think it's more fun that way. I get a big noticeable increase in loot, and I don't feel like bringing a loot increasing frame every single time to every mission. I kind of do, but I mostly don't. I just think that gets old. And if you use Atlas's Petrify with Orgaze, Necros's Desecrate, and Smeda's Charm, you get 3 different layers of loot increasing on enemies, which means you get a lot more loot, which I just think is fun. And so, predictably, I'm probably going to mostly abandon the Smedikavat's damage and just equip utility for that situation. Things that increase its survivability or uptime so that I get Charm as much as possible. I might not do that because I actually run Soul Punch on my Necros, so I can just bring the Kavat back to life right away. So maybe I'll completely forego survivability and just do all utility, something like that. The damage on that loadout is sometimes a little low because I've spent so much space making Necros make more loot in many different ways and doing that as efficiently as possible and not dying and stuff. So maybe I would be interested in doing the damage buff thing. You know, you bring Tenacious Bond and what's the other one that gives you a meaningful damage buff? Reinforced Bond. If the Sentinel has sufficient shields, then you get a fire rate buff. Pretty significant buffs to all of your weapons from just a companion. And so maybe I'll have the Smeda just be like a total utility box with like 8 bond mods and then Animal Companion and Animal Instinct and Fetch. That's the kind of thing I would be into in that case. There are other examples where it's kind of going to go the other way. I'm not going to even further specialize a specialist that was already specializing. I'm going to make something into what I would consider to be a functional or valid specialist or role player where I felt like they kind of weren't before. So for example, there are a lot of Predicites. These are the infected Kubros from Heart of Deimos. A lot of Predicites had interesting abilities, though I'm not sure if some of them have been bug fixed yet, but had interesting abilities. I just felt like the full benefit wasn't entirely there. Like it didn't feel like there was enough of a utility benefit to adding a little offense to the companion. But I mean, I'm thinking of like I think it's the Magi Predicite. This guy has a sort of, it's like a charge, and then you get a radial blind, like an Excalibur radial blind. And this one, I'm like, that's nice. It's nice to just have a bruiser companion, but it would go up on its own and die, and that's been fixed. And it just didn't have incredibly robust offense. You could do the mecha set thing, but now you can do the mecha set thing, you get the charge and the blind, you can do contagious bond, so it spreads status even more. You have the thing with the reducing the armor with vicious bond. You have duplex bond to make copies of it, so more things are attacking. You could make a very robust, like, just beat everybody up companion, and then maybe put a little survivability on it. And you have a kind of set and forget, summon several large rhino dogs and have them, you know, maul everything to death. That to me feels like a much more complete, exciting gameplay option now. So I'm interested in trying to make those things built out quite a bit more as well. I think most companions, there's a fairly logical line of reasoning to build them out to do a certain thing now. And it's really just what remains to be seen is whether and to what extent we get buffs for their precepts and weapons as well, the robot weapons, because that would change a lot as well. I think a lot of the precepts are kind of balanced now that the companions have more support, like better support, but a lot of really old precepts are just kind of bad, in my opinion. A lot of Sentinel precepts in particular are just a little bit too slow for the game as it currently is, I think. And so it would be interesting to see them change them to something that's a bit faster paced that will go off in normal missions. And then you can get some fun out of those. Finally, something I wanted to mention is that I was talking before about the idea that kind of parameters of a companion are very valuable now. If you don't have to spend mod slots kind of setting up a benefit of a companion, it just has high crit chance or high shields or whatever. That can be beneficial now. Another thing that's come up is that some companions, some sentinels, have longer attack range, and it's kind of more valuable to do that now in some ways because you can actually get quite a bit done by shelling enemies from a distance. So, for example, Jin and Dariga can attack from pretty far away, 60 and 70 meters away. If you use Duplex Bond, spend a ton of energy, make clones of your Sentinel, and have three of them just going at it with Verglisses or something, they can menace enemies from quite a distance away. Being able to do that, you're sitting on a cliff overlooking the battlefield. You see some enemies off in the distance. You spend 200 energy like it's going out of style. Summon two copies of your Sentinel, and they just start orbital laser cannoning all the enemies over there. That's very effective in a way it wouldn't really have been previously. Your companion could attack one target at a time and barely kill them in a timely manner when you could just be there killing them all. But now there's a much more robust line of play there, especially like in the open world. I'm kind of interested in that. Anyway, it's definitely still messy. Your companions will still run all over the place. But personally, I was pretty happy with the dipping my toe into the performance of a lot of companions in combat. I talked mostly about what I was looking to talk about. The only thing is I didn't talk about generalists that much. Maybe people listening to this don't really care about that. I literally only mentioned the Nautilus. Well, and like that Magi Predicite example, you have kind of a brawler companion that can do actually meaningful damage now. Um, Even more meaningful damage. But is there anyone else? I mean, a lot of people will look at a companion like the Smedikavat and go for that. I think my account has too many resources for me to get excited about always running a loot enabler, but I think a lot of people will disagree. That's no bad thing. Um, Death Cube energy, but we have so many ways to get energy now, including many other companions. I don't know. I'll say that one last thing I'm interested in as new changes keep coming out, a space to watch is that a lot of Kubros, a lot of older Kubros, have particularly weak precepts. Like the weakest companion effects in Warframe are probably vanilla Kubros, most vanilla Kubros. We have Retrieve, Chessa Crate, Chessa Desecrate. Basically, Necros is Desecrate, but one time every 10 seconds. That's just not enough for a 45% chance every 10 seconds to get more loot. So that's one that I would watch carefully to see what the change is if it gets buffed. There are a few other Kubros that their abilities are so weak and redundant, in my opinion, that I don't even remember what they are. One of them is kind of like a shield generating ability, but the taxon generation ability is kind of just better to some extent, but it would be interesting to see how that changes. There's a fear effect, I think, like your Kubro yells and enemies run away, I believe. But again, I think that one has like a incredibly long cooldown, for example. These are things that you could easily imagine changing. Remember, the cooldown reduction on ability of thing is only for Sentinels. So it'll be interesting to see if they balance those somewhat aggressively. I'm not sure, but that would be the thing I would keep an eye out for. Most of the other companions have like reasonable use cases, or the ability is good and the problem is that it doesn't work. So for example, there's a Predicite that has an ability where the description is crazy. You fire like a parasite at an enemy and then it pulls in nearby enemies. That's totally good. Your companion basically uses the larva ability from Nidus. That's good. That's great. I would love that as a generalist option, kind of like the same thing by a different method as the Nautilus, pulling enemies together. Great, good. The problem is it just doesn't work, at least the last time I checked. It often just misses, like the targeting is bad, and I have not seen it pull enemies together. Like as far as I'm aware, it literally just doesn't work. It's never worked, as far as I know. But the ability itself, what it says it does, is good. you get the point. That's the case for a lot of companion abilities. The power level of the idea isn't the problem, it's that it doesn't work. So if those things change, that might be very subtle. They might not change the effect of the mod, but then looking in the bug fixes, you might find that it changed. I'll tell you, once they do more waves of changes like this, I will probably just check all of them, because I don't personally prefer to just weed through the patch notes looking desperately for a specific line. And a lot of the time there are so many changes, good job developers, but it can be hard to read. I'm just going to miss it. You know what I mean? Like it'll be in there and I just won't realize, I won't read it. So my 2 cents is that if you're excited about this subject, it's definitely a space to watch, and I wouldn't count out effects historically, regardless of their power level or bugginess or whatever, because this is a incredibly significant overhaul to the status of companions. I think it's worth considering that there's a different design philosophy here. This is not an update coming from the same motivations as previous updates. We have, I think, basically never gotten an update where there was like a meaningful new metagame basically added to the game all at once rather than just in little pieces. This is a level of vision and intent for companions that I haven't experienced in a Warframe update in a long time. So I would say this is a good type of update cycle to watch carefully, because it will probably not be like previous ones. It's going to be fun, exciting to see what it is, but it might be difficult to follow as well. It might be something to prepare to look through a lot of options. I know I am likely to do at least one more large stream in a few months or whatever, once they've made all their changes, that discusses, here are all of the things now that have been kind of revitalized. I previously did have videos that were kind of a pass of every companion I felt was fit to print. We're getting close to a period in time where that pass would be every companion. There would essentially be a reason to discuss all companions, which is crazy. That's awesome. I think it would be valuable to just talk through literally all of them anyway, because we're close enough that you could kind of use nearly all of them, and it sort of makes sense to do that. Like any random Kubro, using the mecha set and, having status from your Warframe's primary and Contagious Bond to spread statuses more, and the offensive package with Tenacious Bond and Duplex Bond and Vicious Bond, and doing that thing. Any random Kubro equipping those things, just with no precepts, with no abilities of its own, would be pretty decent at this point. So it doesn't necessarily matter that much if they don't have a great ability. It's just they probably will get them. So I would like to wait and see what happens. That was a lot of waffling. I hope it was a delicious waffle. I literally said my 2 cents in something that was $9. So thank you for your patronage, FreeWilliam. I hope you enjoyed this parlay. I hope you're having fun with this new update. I hope that gave you some new ideas or ways to think about what you would find to be a fun way to approach these things. Again, my approach when I discuss these things is generally fun and good. To me, I want both. There's no reason it shouldn't be both. So whichever one you care about, the viability or the enjoyability, or you consider them to be one and the same, or you want both, hopefully those were all things that you will find useful. And again, I did link a few things in the description, or I'll link to maybe the mini playlist I'm going to make of the companion covered stuff I'm going to do, because I find this subject very fun, so I do plan to cover it in some detail in a few different videos over the next few months, streams and shorter videos. So if that sounds fun, I'll include that below too. Anyway, thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed it.